Now it's time for today's Perspective, and it's a book described by the late, great John le Carré as hypnotic, shocking and unputdownable. Ratline, Love, Lies and Justice, on the trial of a Nazi fugitive, or La Filière as it's just been translated into French, tells the story of a senior Nazi, Otto Wächter, whom as governor of Galicia, which is now mostly in Ukraine, presided over a territory which saw hundreds of thousands of Jews and Poles killed in the Second World War. Now, when the war ended, he was indicted for mass murder. The book tells the story of his time on the run, spending 3 years hiding in the Austrian Alps, then to Rome, where he came under the protection of a Vatican bishop, and he died in 1949 in very strange circumstances whilst preparing to travel to Argentina on the Ratline, a shadowy pathway out of Rome for Nazis. And the book follows the author, Philippe Sands' quest to find the truth as he meets Wächter's son, Horst, who 60 years later believes his father still innocent. Well, the author, Philippe Sands, who's also the mastermind behind his other novels like East West Street, is also Professor of Law at University College London, joins us now. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. I'd like to start by putting a little bit your work into context, if we can, because it kind of comes, doesn't it, from your own desire to find out more about your own family history as well, and your ancestors, they were victims, weren't they, to the Nazi Holocaust?
Indeed. My grandfather, who lived on the Rue de Maubeuge in Paris and was for me always a Frenchman, only died in 1997. I knew him well. He never talked about the war or the period before the war, and it was only later in life that I learned he came from a city called Lemberg, today in Ukraine, used to be part of Poland, and before that the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was born there in 1904. And I also learned that he lost his entire family, who were murdered in 1942-43 under the direction of a man called Otto Wächter, whose son I came to know. So there was a very personal interest. But of course, my day job is doing cases on crimes against humanity and genocide at international court. So there's a sort of melding of the personal and the professional.
So let's talk a bit about Otto Wächter, then, the main character in this book, I suppose. I mean, you decided to feature a very specific part of his life, didn't you?
Well, I came to know him because I was introduced to the son. I'd never really focused on him. I met Horst in 2011, and at that point I was focused on the wartime years, what his father did. His father was a senior Nazi from the mid-1930s. He became governor of Krakow. He built the Krakow ghetto. Then in 1942, he's appointed to Lemberg, where he oversees the mass murder of 500,000 Jews and Poles. He is indicted, but unlike many others, he escapes. And that then becomes, for me, a fascinating part of the story. How did he escape? What did he do? Where did he go? And what were the consequences for the family of an indicted man escaping and never being caught? I'm sort of fascinated by that issue.
I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? What on earth did he do? How did he manage to avoid justice?
Well, you couldn't invent it. I mean, he ended up, as I discovered, hiding in the Austrian mountains above 2,000 meters with a young Waffen-SS soldier. And at a certain point, I said to Horst, who I get on with very well, tell me about this Burkhard Ratman, the young SS soldier who saved your father's life. He was a mountain killer, survivor in high altitudes. And Horst looked at me very sweetly, this was 2017, and said, you want to know about Buko? Well, I can give you all the answers to your questions, or we could telephone him. And it was one of the most remarkable moments in my life. 72 years after the moment of escape, after the end of the war, Buko was alive and well then, living in Germany, and we went to visit him, and he told me the whole story. It was absolutely extraordinary.
And tell us more about Horst as well. I mean, it's such a strange relationship you have with him, isn't it? I mean, he's sometimes your friend, sometimes he's your research assistant. Ultimately, though, I mean, he's an apologist, isn't he, for what his father did? And you've been trying to persuade him, haven't you, that perhaps his father isn't who he thought he was?
Yeah, I failed miserably, it has to be said. I have not persuaded him as to the criminality of his father, useless, failed advocacy. But the thing about Horst that's important is I now realize he, in a sense, is a victim. He was 6 when the war ended, and his entire life has been devoted to safeguarding the reputation of his parents. He'll say to me, it's not my father so much that I love, it's my mother who saved me, who looked after me, who was good to me, who loved me. My mother loved my father, and it's my duty as a son to find the good in my father. And the thing that's crucial is he's not a Nazi, he's not a nationalist, he's not an anti-Semite, he's not a Holocaust denier. He just is desperate to find the good in his father. So he will say, my father was there, my father was present, but no, he wasn't a criminal.
And despite you uncovering all this evidence to the contrary, you're still friends, aren't you?
Well, friends, we're certainly very much in touch. I mean, he sent me an email the other day describing the book as Schreckly, dreadful, because he says I've left out all the nice bits about his dad, the documents that show who he helped, who he saved. Of course, there are no such documents, and much worse, I uncovered in various archives, including an extraordinary archive in Poland, photographs of his father actually overseeing an act of mass murder. Horst looks at the photograph and, dissembles. He always finds a way to find another interpretation. It is remarkable, but I don't dislike him. We've stayed in touch, and of course, spoiler alert, right at the end of the book, the next generation gets in touch, and that is a big surprise, his daughter.
Let's leave that as a spoiler. You also mentioned the wife, the mother. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it, when you read the book, you see that kind of human ability to love and to hate at the same time, just within a few seconds.
But I think, isn't that something we all recognise from our own families? I mean, the role of the mother. I mean, for me, Charlotte Wächter is actually the beating heart of the book. It's the untold story of any horror story, any case of mass murder, genocide, crimes against humanity. You sort of ask your question because invariably it's the men who are the perpetrators. What did the spouses do? What did the wives do? And now we know, I think almost uniquely, because we've got her diaries, we've got her letters, we've got her reminiscences, not a hint of apology. She was a total true believer. She was egging her husband on. She was encouraging him, and she knew everything. So in a sense, she was deeply complicit, herself deeply anti-Semitic, a total Nazi. There's an amazing moment where she is apprehended by the Americans in her hometown of Zell am See, where she's living when the war ends. And US Army Major asks her, so, madam, are you a Nazi? And she says, of course, I'm a proud Nazi. And he says to her, you're the first one we've met since we entered Austria. You couldn't invent this character.
And Philippe, I mean, you're also a professor of law, practicing barrister, as you mentioned. I mean, you're involved in a series of high-profile international cases, Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, Guantanamo and Rohingya. I mean, do you think what's happened to your own family has kind of led you to a desire to kind of tackle so many human rights interests in both your professions, if you like, as an author and as a barrister as well?
No, absolutely. I had a couple of fabulous teachers at university, one Yorkshireman and one actually who happened to be the son of the man who invented the term crimes against humanity. And there's no question that my own family life, my mother was a hidden child just outside Paris for 4 years. From 1940 to 1944, she was saved by a succession of Catholic families in a small town called Meudon. And that has profoundly informed what I think. And of course, when I'm involved in these cases, a year ago, I found myself at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, sitting literally right next to Aung San Suu Kyi as she defended the indefensible in relation to the Rohingya. And I'm asking myself the question, why is she doing this? And the answer to that question, of course, is intimately connected to her own relationship to her father, whose reputation I think, in effect, she is defending. He was the founder of the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar modern-day army, which, of course, is responsible for the atrocities perpetrated against the Rohingya. So family matters are always extremely important.
Interesting to hear you make that very, well, now you've said it, obvious link. Thanks very much for talking to us today. We could go on all day, but unfortunately we're out of time.
Thank you so much.
Philippe, thank you very much. Philippe Sands there talking to us there about his new book, Ratline, just been translated as well into French. So if you want to read it in French, you can. The main headlines now on France 24. The most sweeping rollback of coronavirus restrictions yet in the US as Texas's governor says it is time to reopen the state. That, as President Joe Biden says there will be enough vaccines in the country for its entire adult population by the end of May. And France set to decide if new local lockdown measures are needed to curb slowly climbing infection rates. The vaccination rollout not enough yet to keep cases down.